He lived alone in a desert hangar fixing broken engines that no one cared about anymore. Until one afternoon, a group of strangers brought him a rusted prototype as a joke and unknowingly reignited something he'd buried long ago. But this story isn't about machines. It's about what happens when something, or someone, finally breathes again. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt stories about second chances, quiet resilience, and the beauty of unexpected connections, consider subscribing to the channel. It's a simple way to support this journey and make sure you never miss the next one. Now, let's begin. Poor mechanic took on a junk engine as a joke, but the CEO froze when it ran, smoother than her jet. The desert air shimmered over the tarmac like a hallucination, turning the rusted hangars into ghosts of a busier time. The airport hadn't seen a commercial flight in years, just dust storms, stray coyotes, and the occasional crop duster. But today, a black SUV rolled past the no trespassing sign like it owned the place. Inside the garage, Noah Brennan wiped a thin line of grease off his brow with the back of his wrist. He was hunched over the gutted remains of a 1978 Cessna engine, its insides spilling onto a tarp like metal entrails. He moved slowly but with precision, like a man who'd spent his life listening to the hums and murmurs of machines others had long stopped hearing. The door creaked open. Noah didn't look up. "Excuse me," a voice called out, young, cocky, clipped. "You the mechanic?" Noah adjusted a wrench, then glanced sideways. 3 men and a woman in business casual attire stood framed in sunlight. The woman wore Ray-Bans and held a tablet. The tallest guy chewed gum like he was trying to prove something. "We've got something for you," the tall one said. "Thought you might want to take a crack at it. You know, for old time's sake." Now Noah looked up, his face shadowed beneath his weathered cap. "What is it?" he asked flatly. The woman tilted the tablet so he could see. A grainy schematic filled the screen. Familiar lines, intricate curves. Noah's body stiffened. Thundercore. He hadn't seen that name in 15 years. "You recognize it, huh?" Gumchewer grinned. "Found it in one of our storage yards. A total wreck. Prototype, I think. Doesn't run. Never did." "And you brought it here?" Noah asked, already knowing the answer. "It's a joke," said the woman, her voice tight. "One of the guys bet he could get you to touch it. You used to work with Ventra, didn't you? Back when this thing was still a dream." Noah's eyes narrowed. The engine they were referring to, the Thundercore, was no joke to him. It was the project that had destroyed everything. A radical propulsion design shelved after a critical failure during testing. One man was nearly killed. Noah had taken the fall. Publicly, quietly, permanently. He wiped his hands and stood. "Where is it?" he asked. The group exchanged glances. "Out back," Gumchewer said. "We towed it in. Figured if anyone could make it sputter, it'd be the ghost who designed half of it." "I didn't design it," Noah said. "Just made it breathe." They laughed, not unkindly. The kind of laugh you give a veteran you think is harmless now. "You'll try it?" the woman asked, still studying him. "I'll look," Noah muttered. "That's all." The Thundercore sat behind the hangar under a faded tarp, its casing oxidized, panels missing. But Noah knew its shape like he knew the lines on his own palm. The intake design had been his obsession. The coupling system, Timothy's. His jaw clenched. He reached out, touched the metal, and felt warmth, memory. A hum beneath his fingers that wasn't there but used to be. One of the engineers, a short guy with thick glasses, stepped forward. "You really think you can get it to fire?" Noah didn't answer. He circled the engine, slowly assessing. "It's dead, old man," another said. "It never even worked." Noah crouched beside it, examining a corroded fuel line. "Then why are you still talking to it?" Silence. "You really gonna mess with it?" Glasses asked. "I'm not here to prove anything," Noah said quietly. "But if you're gonna mock a machine that almost killed a man, you better hope someone remembers how to treat it with respect." The woman approached him later while the others stepped away to check their phones. "I'm Natalie," she said. "They're not bad kids. Just..." don't understand what it is." Noah looked at her for a moment. "Do you?" Her mouth twitched. "No, but I want to." She held out a worn envelope. This came with it. Internal memo. Figured you might want to see it. Noah opened the envelope. A folded piece of paper slid out an archived cancellation notice. Project Thundercore discontinued by order of Executive Vice President V. Hart. Vivian Hart. He knew the name. Everyone in aviation did. He handed it back without a word. "You knew her?" Natalie asked. Noah stood. "I knew what her pen could do." She didn't ask what he meant. That night, under the cracked tin roof of his trailer, Noah stared at the tarp covering the engine outside. The desert wind rattled windows that hadn't been sealed properly in a decade. But all he could hear was Timothy's voice, excited, too excited, saying, "We're going to change how the sky works." Noah had told him to wait. Test again. Timothy hadn't listened. Or maybe Noah hadn't spoken loud enough. Either way, when the fuel lines burst and the fire came, only one man was left to take the blame. And he had. He stepped outside. The stars were cruel and bright above the desert. He walked to the engine and sat beside it. "I never thought I'd see you again," he whispered. "Guess neither of us got the ending we were promised." The machine said nothing, but in the silence, Noah made a decision. He'd fix it. Not for them. Not for redemption. But because no machine deserved to die without someone who believed it still had something left to give. And maybe, neither did he. The next morning arrived with the hush of early desert light, and Noah was already at work. The Thundercore sat in the open, now stripped of its tarp like a patient on the table. A few birds fluttered overhead, cautious of the sudden signs of life in a place long considered dead. Noah leaned over the casing, hands black with grease and history. He worked with a calm intensity, no fanfare, no drama, just a steady rhythm like breathing. It had been years since he'd touched anything this advanced, but his fingers remembered things his mind had tried to forget. He was bent over the intake valve when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Not the SUV from yesterday. This was smoother, lighter. A silver sedan pulled up and parked precisely like it was trained to. From it stepped a woman in her mid-40s, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, hair pulled back with severe precision. She didn't belong here. That was obvious from the way the sunlight bounced off her heels, clean sharp, unbothered by the dust. Noah didn't straighten. "You must be Mr. Brennan," she said. He grunted in acknowledgement, not turning. She walked closer, heels tapping against the concrete. "I'm Vivian Hart, CEO of Ventra Aerotech." That made him pause. He looked up, his eyes squinting against the light. Her face was composed, unreadable, the way only people in power learn to wear. "I know who you are," he said flatly. "I heard about the Thundercore," she said, "and that you were working on it." "I'm not working on it," he replied. "I'm listening to it." Vivian blinked, the edge of her expression flickering. "It was never completed," she said. "The data was inconsistent. The risk unacceptable." "It wasn't the engine's fault," Noah said, turning back to the machinery. "It was ours. We rushed it, pushed too hard, ignored the things that whispered instead of screamed." There was silence. "I authorized the termination of the project," she said, voice steady. "I know." She studied him. "You don't seem angry." Noah gave a bitter laugh. "I was, for a long time. But anger doesn't fix what's broken. Regret does. If you're lucky." Vivian walked slowly around the engine, eyeing it like a relic. "It's a museum piece now." "No," he said. "It's a promise. One we broke. One that still wants to be kept." Her eyes fell on a faint serial number etched along the housing, half obscured by grime. This was the third prototype, she murmured. The one that caught fire. "Timothy was flying it," Noah said quietly. Vivian glanced up, surprised by the sudden sharpness in his tone. "I remember the report," she said. He survived. He did, Noah said. But not whole. You don't forget waking up in a hospital and seeing your friend covered in burns because you missed something. He left the industry. I left too, just a little slower. Vivian folded her arms, unsettled. I signed off on the cancellation because it was necessary. Noah nodded. Maybe it was. But what if the engine wasn't a failure? What if we were the ones who failed it? He stepped aside, gesturing for her to look closer. You know what's wrong with this casing? He asked. She hesitated, then leaned in. The burn marks are only on one side. Fuel leaked from a line. Timothy adjusted the night before. Not the engine's fault. It wasn't even part of the original design. Vivian's brow creased. That was never in the report. I buried it, Noah admitted. Said it was a systems failure. I thought it would protect him. And maybe. I didn't want the world to know. I let someone override a call I should have stood by. Vivian's arms slowly dropped to her sides. The wind picked up, carrying a wisp of dust across the tarmac. Why are you telling me this now? She asked quieter. Because you came here expecting to see a ruin, Noah said. And maybe you still will. But I see something that deserves one more chance. Don't you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd slowed down? Listened better? She didn't answer right away. Then almost to herself, I haven't slowed down in 20 years. Noah met her gaze. Maybe you should start. The silence between them wasn't hostile, just unfamiliar. Two people standing at the ruins of a dream neither of them was willing to fully admit still meant something. Vivian turned to go, then stopped. I'll be back tomorrow. Noah tilted his head. Why I want to see what happens next, she said. Then added after a beat, I'll bring coffee. That night, Noah sat on the steps of his trailer watching the sky dim into violet and gold. He held a worn blueprint in his lap, the corners curled, the ink faded. It was the original schematic for ThunderCore version 1. The version drawn before cost projection, shareholder expectations, and deadlines buried its soul. He traced a line along the intake coil. Timothy's handwriting ran along the margin. Make it breathe like a bird, not growl like a beast. Noah smiled faintly. He hadn't thought of Timothy's words in years. But now, under this sky, with Vivian Hart of all people promising to return, something stirred in him. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe the idea that the past wasn't just a weight. Maybe it was a compass, and maybe it was pointing somewhere new. The next morning, Vivian returned just after sunrise. She wore jeans and a simple cotton blouse, both too new for desert dust but far less formal than before. In her hands were 2 paper cups, their lids steaming slightly in the cool air. Noah was already working, crouched beside the ThunderCore, his face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. A single radio, perched on the fender of an old truck, played jazz, soft, smoky saxophone winding through the silence. Vivian hesitated. She wasn't used to showing up anywhere without an appointment, or silence being anything but awkward. Black coffee, she said, finally holding out a cup. Noah took it without looking up. Didn't take you for the kind to remember someone else's preferences. I don't, she replied. I guessed. A ghost of a smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. Good guess. She crouched a few feet away, watching him run his fingers along the curvature of the intake housing like a violinist checking tension on a bowstring. I have engineers, she said. Dozens of them. Top of their class. They work with simulations and AI modeling. But none of them do. This Noah asked without glancing up. Touch a machine like it might touch back. He was quiet for a moment, then straightened his back, wiped his hands on a rag. His eyes met hers, clear, piercing, the kind that didn't ask permission to be honest. I was raised by machines, he said. My dad ran a repair shop for crop dusters. We didn't talk much, but every day he'd start an engine and listen. Just listen. He said machines always speak first if you're quiet enough to hear. Vivian tilted her head, intrigued. What do they say? They say what they need. and sometimes what they've lost. She sipped her coffee. That's poetic. It's mechanical. Noah moved toward the side panel and gestured for her to come closer. Tentatively, she stepped forward. "Put your hand here," he said. She hesitated, then did as he instructed, pressing her palm against the cool metal. "Now, close your eyes," he added. "Tell me what you feel." Vivian closed her eyes. Silence, the kind that vibrated in your teeth. The faintest hum may be imagined. "It's still," she whispered. "But not dead," Noah said. "You can feel the tension in the frame, the way it holds breath even now. This engine wasn't built to roar, it was built to sing." Vivian opened her eyes and looked at him, startled by the intimacy in his tone, not romantic, but reverent. "How long has it been since you touched one of these?" she asked. 15 years, he said. "Not because I couldn't, because I wouldn't." "Why now?" He turned back to the thunder core, ran his fingers over a weathered bolt. "Because you brought it back," he said, "even if you didn't mean to." Vivian didn't respond right away. She felt something shift inside her, unsettling but not unpleasant, like a house settling into its foundation after a long storm. Noah continued working as she watched tools clicking in rhythm with the jazz floating through the air. There was grace in the way he moved, precise, patient. Every bolt loosened with care, every wire tested like it had history. And maybe it did. After a while, she wandered toward the back of the hangar where an old corkboard still clung to the wall. Yellowed photos, curled blueprints, and a faded photograph of two younger men. One of them, clearly, Noah, stood beside a half-complete engine with matching grins and greasy hands. She stared at the other man. Timothy. "You kept this up all these years?" she asked, gesturing toward the board. Noah walked over, wiping his hands. "No," he said. "I left it here and never came back." Vivian glanced at him. "Why didn't you throw it away?" "Because some days the best thing you can do is let something wait for you to be ready again." She studied the photograph again. Timothy looked impossibly young, full of fire. "He was the reason I canceled the project," she admitted. "Seeing him in that hospital bed, I'd never felt so useless." "You weren't," Noah said. "You made a call to protect the company, maybe even the world. That's what executives are trained to do, but not always what the heart wants." The hangar fell quiet again. Outside, the wind swept across the cracked runway. A distant hawk circled the ridge. Inside, something else circled gilt hope, something harder to name. Noah reached into a metal drawer and pulled out a tarnished piece of copper with notches like teeth. He handed it to her. "This is the original fuel bypass switch," he said. Timothy replaced it with a newer prototype the night before the test. The one that failed. Vivian turned it in her hand. It was heavier than it looked. Worn, but solid. "I blamed the system," she said quietly. "But it was always easier to blame something you can't see." Noah nodded. "The system doesn't wake up screaming. People do." They stood like that for a while. Two silhouettes framed by steel and sunlight caught in the echo of a choice made long ago. Vivian finally broke the silence. "What happens if you get it running? I let it go," Noah said simply. "This isn't about finishing what we started. It's about finishing what we abandoned." And then he smiled faintly. "Then I'll listen for the next machine calling my name." She looked at him. Really looked, and for the first time in years, Vivian Hart didn't see a project or a timeline or a quarterly report. She saw a man who hadn't lost his purpose, just put it in a drawer until he was brave enough to open it again. And maybe she'd start looking for her drawer too. 3 days passed. Each morning, Vivian showed up just after dawn with 2 cups of coffee, 1 black one with cream. Noah never said which he preferred, but she always gave him the black. He never corrected her. It had become their unspoken ritual. By the 4th day, the Thunder Core no longer looked like a forgotten relic. It sat on a raised mount under full sunlight, scrubbed free of rust and grime, its core panels carefully restored, like a heart waiting for rhythm. Vivian stood beside it now, watching as Noah adjusted a pressure valve with steady hands. A soft breeze stirred the edge of her blouse, and for a moment she forgot the calls she'd missed, the meetings she'd postponed, the world she'd put on pause. "You still haven't asked why I came here," she said. Noah didn't look up. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She took a breath. "A few weeks ago, we were preparing for a company anniversary 25 years. Marketing wanted a nostalgic angle, so they dug through old files. Projects that never launched. Dreams that almost were." He glanced up now, curious. "One of them was this engine," she continued. "I hadn't thought about it in years. Not since—" She trailed off, gaze drifting. "Not since the accident," Noah said softly. She nodded. "I signed the shutdown order that same night. Everyone said it was the right call. Clean. Decisive. I was promoted 6 months later." There was no bitterness in her voice, but no pride either. "I found a folder tucked at the bottom of a scanned archive," she went on. It was labeled Field Annotations, T. Reed. Her eyes lifted to Noah's, and there was a note in the margin of a blueprint. One I didn't remember writing, but the handwriting was mine. Noah raised a brow. "What did it say?" She hesitated, then quoted, "If this works, we won't just change how engines fly, we'll change how people dream." Noah turned fully to her, now resting the wrench on the frame. "I remember that day," he said. "We just finished the intake test. The engine held stable for 12 seconds. You came by to observe. You asked me what I thought," Vivian said, the memory falling into place like dust settling into an old groove. "I said it was reckless." "But your hand trembled when you said it," Noah added. "Not because of fear, because of excitement." A silence bloomed between them, thick-weighted with what could have been. And yet it wasn't painful. Not now. "I forgot I used to care that much," Vivian said, almost to herself. "Somewhere along the way, I traded dreams for data." "That's what leadership teaches," Noah replied. "Keep the train running, even if you're not sure where the tracks go anymore." She turned back toward the engine. "I didn't come to shut this down. I came to understand what I gave up." Noah studied her. There was no makeup today, no armor in her posture. She looked younger, not in appearance but in spirit. "You regret it?" he asked. "Regret implies I would have done differently," she said. "But the truth is, I don't know if I could have." Noah nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's not about changing the past. Maybe it's about giving the future a better story." She looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "You always talk like machines are alive," she said. "They are," he said. "At least the good ones." A moment passed, and then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and handed it to him. "What's this?" He unfolded it. At the top was the same shutdown order he'd seen years ago, dated, signed by her. At the bottom, in fresh ink, was a single sentence. "This signature stood between you and the sky. Today, I remove it." Beneath it, her initials. V.H. Dated today. Noah stared at the page. He hadn't expected this. Not from her. "I know it's symbolic," she said. "I don't own this engine anymore. But maybe it matters that someone finally said, 'We were wrong.'" Noah folded the page and slid it into the front pocket of his shirt. He said nothing. But she saw the way his shoulders lowered just slightly, as if something heavy had been lifted. Then he turned back to the Thunder Core. "Come here," he said. Vivian stepped forward. "Help me attach this intake housing," he said. "It's awkward to do alone." She hesitated, then took the tool he handed her and knelt beside him. Their arms brushed as they worked, careful, focused, like two people handling something sacred. And in truth, they were. This wasn't just about rebuilding an engine. It was about rewriting a moment in time that had defined them both, and choosing together not to let it define them anymore. When they finished, Vivian stood and wiped her hands. What now? Noah looked up at the engine. Now we make it breathe again. Vivian exhaled long and slow as if preparing herself. No pressure. Right, Noah grinned. Just gravity friction and the ghost of everything we could have been. She smiled, and it was real. Not the polished kind that adorned press releases or boardroom wins, but the quiet kind. The kind that said, I'm still here. I'm still capable of wonder. As the sun dipped low and painted the desert in copper and gold, Noah flipped the main breaker, and the thunder core blinked alive for just a moment. Enough to promise. Enough to hope. And for now, that was enough. The wind was picking up again. It swept across the desert airstrip in low, dry waves carrying the scent of sun-warmed metal and something older like memory rising from the dust. Inside the hangar, Noah stood beneath a yellowed skylight. The Thunder Core's housing now fully resealed, its spine reconnected. He ran a cloth along the copper, tubing his motions, slow, almost reverent. Every turn of the wrench, every tightening of a bolt felt like stitching closed a wound he hadn't known was still open. And above the hum of quiet progress, a voice echoed in his mind. We're gonna change how the sky works. Timothy's voice. Still young, still believing. Noah paused, resting both hands on the engine. The blueprint was open on a nearby table version 1. The original schematic. Lines faded by time, but the intentions were clear. He'd kept it all these years folded between stacks of forgotten designs. Not for reference, but because it had felt like the last honest thing he'd ever drawn. Vivian entered quietly, holding 2 bottles of water and a sandwich wrapped in paper. I figured coffee wasn't enough if you're skipping lunch, she said, walking toward the workbench. Noah offered a nod of thanks, taking the bottle. You always this generous to men who talk to engines, only the ones who talk back, she said with a hint of a smile. She set the sandwich down and studied the blueprint. This is the original, isn't it? Yeah, he replied. The one we believed in before funding / the timeline before marketing wanted it press ready in 6 months before. We all stopped listening to the machine. Vivian leaned closer, tracing a penciled margin note with her finger. Revise intake path to reduce oxygen surge dated 2 days before the accident. That was Timothy's idea, Noah said softly. He made the call. I told him to wait. But he wanted to impress you. Vivian blinked. Me? He thought you were the only person in the building who really understood what we were doing, he said. He used to call you the quiet flame. Said you didn't say much, but you paid attention. She laughed gently, unexpectedly. That's not how people talk about me now. That's not how you let them. The words hung in the air, and for a moment Noah wished he could pull them back. But Vivian didn't flinch. She sat down beside the blueprint, folding her hands in her lap. You're right, she said after a long pause. I stopped letting people see that side of me. The one that dreams. Noah watched her quietly, surprised by the honesty. When I was a girl, she continued, I used to sneak into my grandfather's barn. He had this old Piper Cub he never flew anymore, but I'd sit inside it and pretend I was crossing oceans. I used to tell myself I'd design a jet so quiet it could carry people to new worlds without waking the sky. He said nothing. Just let her speak. But then MIT came, and internships, and boardrooms, and suddenly the girl in the Piper Cub wasn't invited anymore. She gave a small, dry smile. And I got really good at pretending she never existed. You don't sound proud of that, he said. I'm not. A long moment passed between them. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty, just full of the weight of things that should have been said long ago. I think that's why I really came here, she said finally. Not just for the engine. I wanted to know if there was still something inside me that hadn't calcified. There is, Noah said simply. She turned to him, almost startled. You wouldn't be here if there wasn't, he added. You could have signed it off again. Buried it twice. She reached for the edge of the blueprint and folded it carefully, then gently placed it into his hands. Then, let's see if it still breathes. That night, after Vivian had gone, Noah pulled out a storage box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photographs, project notes, a cracked metal nameplate, Timothy Reed, lead engineer. He held the nameplate for a long time. Then he picked up a cassette tape, worn at the edges, labeled in faint red ink Thundercore test notes, April 4th. He walked over to the old tape player on his shelf, had to blow dust out of the slot, and slid the tape in. A soft click. Then Timothy's voice, young and excited. Test log 87. We've modified the surge dampeners with Noah's revised bracket. Intake's holding better. If we can stabilize at 3,000 RPM for more than 20 seconds, we're in uncharted air. Noah says, wait. I say fly. Time will tell who's right. The tape crackled and cut. Noah sat there in silence. Hands folded, heart full. He didn't cry, not this time. But something inside him shifted like an old machine turning over for the first time in years. He stood, walked to the Thundercore, and ran his hand along the casing one more time. We're not building perfection, he whispered. We're building permission. To forgive. To hope. To try again. In the distance, the wind carried a low howl over the desert ridge curling through the hangar's broken glass like breath. The engine didn't answer. But Noah didn't need it to. Not yet. By the 6th morning, the desert felt different. Not cooler Arizona in June made no such promises, but alive in a way Noah hadn't felt in years. The sun hadn't even cleared the ridge, yet the air shimmered faintly as if the earth was holding its breath. The Thundercore engine stood at the center of the hangar like a relic reborn, surrounded by tool carts, diagnostic cables, and scattered memories. Vivian arrived with a quiet knock on the frame of the open hangar door. She carried no coffee this time. Instead, she held a small paper bag and 2 ceramic mugs. I figured we'd graduated from takeout lids, she said. Noah raised a brow. You're trusting me with real dishes now. You haven't broken anything yet, she replied, walking toward the old workbench near the back. They sat without speaking for a moment. The mugs between them steamed gently. She'd brewed it herself, strong, smooth, and earthy like something pulled from old habits. It felt strangely domestic. Vivian reached into the bag and pulled out 2 slices of banana bread wrapped in wax paper. Don't get used to this, she warned. Noah chuckled, noted. He took a bite. It's good. It's from a cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, she said. I haven't been there in years. Used to go every Saturday morning. Before everything. She didn't clarify. She didn't need to. He nodded, taking another bite. Funny how routines die quiet deaths. And how loud they get when they come back, she added. They sipped in silence for a while, the engine looming just beyond them like a sleeping giant. The diagnostics were nearly done. A few final systems remained, but it was close now. So close Noah could feel the hum beneath his palms like an animal waiting to stretch its legs. Vivian broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing now if it hadn't failed? He didn't look up. Every day. She studied him. And I used to think I'd be designing high-altitude jet systems in a windowless lab, he said, giving TED Talks, signing books about innovation. And now he looked at her, his gaze steady. Now I think maybe this, he gestured around the hangar, was always where I was meant to be. She leaned forward. You don't resent it? No, he said. I resented it for a long time. Then I realized something. What? That the things that break us sometimes hand us the blueprints for who we're supposed to become. Vivian sat back, folding her hands around the mug like it was something warm she'd nearly forgotten how to hold. I envy that clarity, she said softly. You don't have it. She shook her head. I have spreadsheets. I have projections and votes of confidence and board expectations. But clarity. She gave a quiet laugh. Not for a long time. Noah studied her eyes, narrowing not with judgment but with understanding. Then why are you here? She hesitated, then set her mug down with both hands' fingers lingering at the base. Because I think I wanted to watch someone do something for the right reason, she said. Not for a paycheck. Not for applause. Just because it was worth doing. Noah looked at her, his face unreadable for a long beat. Then he stood and walked toward the engine. He ran a hand along its frame. "Come here," he said. Vivian joined him. He pointed to a small copper junction near the intake assembly. "You see that groove?" She nodded. "It's not supposed to be there," he said, "but I left it in on purpose. It creates a micro-disruption in flow, reduces pressure surge at low altitude. The engineers said it was inefficient. But I tested it over and over. It worked, and you kept it." "I fought for it," he said, "because the data didn't matter. The feeling did. The engine felt steadier. And sometimes that's enough." Vivian reached out and touched the groove. Her fingers lingered. "That's not in the official notes." "No," he said. "Some things don't belong in reports." She turned to him. "Like this." His brow creased. "What do you mean?" "This whole thing," she said. "Us. Here. Rebuilding something that should have died years ago." Noah was silent. Then he said, "It didn't die. It just waited." Their eyes met, and for a moment the hangar felt small, like a cathedral filled with the weight of something sacred and old. Not romance. Not yet. But something undeniable. Vivian looked away first. "I have to go back tomorrow," she said. "To the city, to the world." He nodded slowly. "Makes sense." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But I don't want this to end unfinished." He unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn diagram, a redesign of the stabilization system they'd once debated. Her annotations, neat and bold, ran along the margins. "You did this?" She nodded. "Last night. I couldn't sleep. I just started sketching." Noah studied the lines, then looked up at her, a quiet smile forming. "Welcome back," he said. Her eyes shimmered. "I wasn't sure I still had it." "You never lost it," he said. "You just stopped believing it mattered." Outside, a breeze kicked up again, rattling the tin roof and scattering a few pages from the workbench. Vivian caught one mid-air and laughed free light, nothing like the woman who had first walked into his hangar days ago. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. "You sure I'm not finished listening?" she replied. And with that, she turned and walked toward the sunlit doorway. Noah watched her go, the echo of her voice still dancing between the metal walls. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. The desert was still. It was the kind of stillness that came just before the moment something happened, the brief, breathless pause before the world remembered to turn again. Inside the hangar, the Thunder Core sat gleaming under the morning sun like a beast roused from a long sleep. No longer forgotten. No longer broken. Ready. Noah stood beside it, arms crossed, a faint tension in his shoulders betraying what his face refused to show. Vivian was running late. It wasn't like her. Since the day she'd first stepped into the hangar, she had arrived each morning like clockwork, coffee in hand, mind sharp, presence grounded. But today, 20 minutes had passed, and she was nowhere to be seen. He didn't check his watch. He didn't pace. He simply waited. And in that waiting, he realized something he didn't want to start without her. Not because she needed to see it, because he needed her to. The past week had been more than a restoration project. It had been a return to the work, yes, but also to himself. And somehow she'd become part of that return. Her questions, her sketches, her silence when it mattered. She wasn't just watching, she was witnessing. The roar of tires over gravel interrupted his thoughts. A moment later, the familiar silver sedan pulled up. Vivian stepped out, slightly flushed hair, a bit tousled. No coffee today, no bag of banana bread. But she was smiling. "I had to stop by the office first," she said. "Didn't think I'd miss anything." "You didn't," Noah replied. "I was waiting." She blinked, touched by the admission, but said nothing. She stepped into the hangar and looked at the engine, then at him. So this is it. He nodded. Final diagnostics are clear. All systems green. We're ready. Vivian walked a slow circle around the thunder core, her heels echoing across the concrete floor. The air felt charged, the kind of energy you feel before a lightning strike. "Let's do it," she said. Noah moved to the control panel. He didn't rush. Every motion was measured, his fingers dancing across switches, his eyes scanning pressure readouts and power levels like a pianist testing keys before a final performance. Vivian stood back watching. This is what he was born for, she thought. Noah turned the ignition key. Nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then click. A low rumble. A vibration. A sound like the first heartbeat in a newborn's chest. The engine sputtered, coughed, growled, and then it sang. A clean, rich whir pulsed from the turbine, rising into a steady, thrilling hum. The kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel in your ribcage, in your palms, and the marrow of your bones. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. But it was alive. Noah stepped back slowly, eyes wide, not with surprise, but reverence. Vivian's hands went to her mouth. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But her throat caught and she blinked hard. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Noah nodded. "It's better than it ever was." He walked toward the engine, gently resting one hand against its side. "It doesn't roar like we designed it to. It breathes, like it waited this long just to exhale." Vivian moved to stand beside him. Together they watched the gauges steady. The temperatures held. The pressure levels hovered exactly where they were supposed to be. Perfection wasn't the goal anymore, but somehow this was better. "This isn't just an engine," she said quietly. "No," Noah said. "It's a second chance." He turned to look at her. "Not just for this machine, for both of us." She met his gaze, and in it there was no boardroom veneer, no corporate composure, just a woman who had once dreamed of crossing oceans in a paper-thin aircraft, and a man who had buried his brilliance under the weight of guilt. And now, standing in front of a machine that should have died 15 years ago, they were both breathing again. Vivian reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "I brought this." He took it, unfolded it. It was a letter printed on Ventra Aerotech letterhead. A formal statement of retraction. Vivian Hart hereby acknowledges and reverses the judgment made regarding the termination of Project Thunder Core. The engine, once deemed unviable, has now proven operable under revised conditions. Its success is attributed to independent restoration led by Mr. Noah Brennan. At the bottom, her signature. Clean, bold, undeniable. "I wanted it in writing," she said. "Even if no one else reads it but you." Noah held the paper, then folded it gently and slid it into his pocket. "Thank you." "For what?" "For listening," he said. "To me, to the engine, to yourself." Vivian let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. "I used to be afraid of what silence would say to me. And now I think it was always waiting for me to shut up long enough to hear something worth hearing." They shared a quiet laugh. Then Noah stepped back, eyes still on the engine, now purring like it belonged to the future again. "I'm not putting it back in a lab," he said. "This one doesn't belong in a museum." Vivian looked at him. Then, where he smiled. Somewhere it can keep flying even if it never leaves the ground. As the sound of the engine echoed into the morning, Vivian closed her eyes and listened. Not as a CEO, not as the woman who once shut it all down, but as the girl in the barn sitting in the old Piper Cub dreaming of a sky that no longer seemed so far away. The hangar had never been this quiet, not even during its years of abandonment. The engine had been shut down, systems powered off, but the space remained full charged with something unspoken. As if the Thunder Core, even in silence, had left a vibration in the air, a hum that reached into the walls, the floor, their skin. Noah sat at the workbench, staring down at the folded retraction letter. It rested beside his old blueprint and Timothy's cracked nameplate like fragments of two lives trying to merge into one whole story. Vivian stood nearby, one hand pressed against the edge of the steel table. Her knuckles were pale, her jaw tight. "I wasn't going to tell you," she said. Noah looked up slowly. He said nothing, just waited. Vivian drew a breath, the kind of breath you take before plunging into cold water. "I wasn't just the executive who signed the project's termination," she said. "I was also the one who submitted the internal memo pushing for it in the first place, the day after the accident, before the report was even finalized." Noah blinked. Once. Then looked away. She continued. "I didn't know about Timothy's modifications. I didn't know he'd changed the fuel system on his own. But that didn't matter to the board. What mattered was the headline, 'Prototype Fire Nearly Kills Engineer,' and the recommendation from the inside, 'From me.'" She swallowed. "I thought I was protecting the company. I told myself I was protecting you, that if we acted quickly they wouldn't come after you." Noah's jaw tensed. "You thought you were protecting me by erasing what we built?" he asked. Vivian stepped closer. "I thought I was protecting what you could become. I didn't think you'd disappear." He stood slowly, hands flat on the table. "I didn't disappear," he said. "I was buried." His voice wasn't angry, but it was heavy. It carried the weight of years he didn't talk about. Years he'd spent staring at broken things because he couldn't bear to face the one thing that had broken him most. Vivian's voice softened. "I never stopped wondering if I'd made the wrong call." "Then why didn't you reach out?" "Because I was a coward," she said. "Because by the time I realized what I'd done, you were already gone. And I convinced myself you were better off out of it." Noah turned away from her, moving to the other side of the hangar. The light streaming through the high windows caught the edge of his profile, lined, tired, proud. I blamed myself for everything he said. The failure, the injury, the fallout. I carried it like a badge, told myself I deserved it. He looked at her now, and for the first time there was no filter in his voice. "But I didn't know you were the one who lit the match." The words hung in the air. Vivian flinched but didn't look away. "I did," she said simply, "and I've spent every year since trying to become the kind of person who wouldn't do that again." Noah crossed his arms. "And are you?" "I'm here," she said. "Not as your boss. Not as a CEO. Just as someone who finally stopped running." He nodded slowly, then looked at the Thunder Core. "You know what saved that engine?" he asked. She shook her head. "I stopped trying to fix it," he said. "I started listening to it, letting it tell me what it needed. Piece by piece." He turned back to her. "That's how people work too." Vivian's voice trembled just slightly. "So what do you need?" He hesitated, then walked toward her. Close, but not too close. "I need to stop being angry at ghosts," he said. "And I need to forgive the person who put them there." Her eyes welled, but she didn't blink them away. "I'm sorry, Noah." He nodded. "I know." A long silence passed. The kind of silence that didn't need filling. It did its work just by being shared. Finally, Noah exhaled and turned back to the bench. He picked up a small round component, an old part from the engine's early days. He held it in both hands, turning it thoughtfully. "Do you remember when Timothy said we should name the engine?" Vivian smiled faintly. "I told him it was too sentimental. He wanted to call it Whisperbird. Said it didn't roar like a jet. It sang like something born to glide." She stepped beside him. "I like that." Noah set the part down. "Me too." He looked over at her, and for the first time in years his eyes held no weight, no guardedness, just presence. "You ever think about what happens after this?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "After the engine, after we finally let go of the things we thought we had to carry." Vivian nodded slowly. "I think maybe we stop surviving and start living." He chuckled. "That sounds dangerously hopeful." "Yeah," she said with a warm smile. doesn't it?" They stood there as the late afternoon sun slanted through the hangar. The light turned golden, catching motes of dust that drifted like soft sparks in the air. Two people, two pasts, one unfinished beginning, and the first breath of something neither had allowed themselves to imagine until now. Not redemption, not yet, but reconciliation. And that was a start. The sky turned lavender over the desert and the hangar door creaked open to let in the dusk. It had been a quiet day, no test runs, no tools clanging, no technical debates. Just Noah working alone, adjusting a few last components on the Thunder Core, not because he had to, but because it felt like saying goodbye properly. Vivian hadn't come that morning. There'd been no coffee, no conversation, no soft laughter echoing between metal walls. And somehow that absence echoed louder than any misfire the engine had ever given. He didn't try to call her. He wasn't even sure if he'd memorized her number. Instead, he moved slowly around the engine, tightening and inspecting not out of need, but reverence. The Thunder Core no longer felt like a project or even a symbol. It felt like a closing chapter, one he hadn't realized he needed to finish before starting a new one. By sundown, he'd swept the floor, wiped down the workbench, and folded the original blueprint carefully into a large manila envelope. The nameplate reading T. Reed rested atop it, polished for the first time in 15 years. He wrapped a thin leather cord around the envelope, then paused. A shadow crossed the door. Vivian. She didn't speak as she entered, dressed casually, hair wind-tousled. There was no briefcase, no mug, no signature coat of armor that typically followed her. Only her. And that was more than enough. "I didn't think you were coming," Noah said. "I wasn't," she replied. "But then I realized something." He tilted his head. She stepped forward, voice soft. "I didn't want the last time I saw you to be when we were both still holding back." Noah set the envelope down and crossed his arms, not defensively, just out of habit. "You're leaving," he said, not as a question. "I have to," she said. "Ventra's waiting, emails, board meetings, the machine I built." He nodded slowly. "But I don't want to go back as her," she continued. Who, he asked? The woman who signs the end of things. Who erases engines because they're too complicated to explain to shareholders. The woman who forgets why she started in the first place. Noah's throat tightened. Then, don't. Vivian smiled gently. "That's the thing. I can't stop being her unless I remember how to start being something else. And I think that starts with asking a question I've never asked anyone before." She reached into her jacket pocket and held out a small white card. Simple. Clean. On it, handwritten in blue ink, dinner. No agenda, no plans. Just two people who need to stop pretending they don't want more than closure. Below, a restaurant name. A time. A signature. V. Noah didn't take it right away. He studied her face, and what he saw there stopped him. Not desperation, not apology, hope, the quiet kind. The kind that's more terrifying than longing because it dares you to believe again. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm not," she said, "but I'm showing up anyway." Noah took the card, folded it once, slipped it into his shirt pocket without a word. Vivian stepped back, letting her gaze fall on the engine one more time. "I used to think progress meant never looking back," she said. "Now I think maybe it means choosing what to carry forward." He looked at her. "What would you carry?" She met his eyes without flinching. "You." A beat of silence. Then she nodded, turned, and walked out. No fanfare, no dramatic exit. Just a door swinging closed and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, jasmine and something electric like a storm waiting to happen. Noah stood there long after she left. He listened, not to the wind, not to the creak of steel, but to the beat in his own chest. Slow, certain, alive. He walked over to the Thunder Core, rested a hand on its side, and smiled. "You did what you were meant to do," he said. "You waited." Then he turned off the lights, locked the hangar behind him, and stepped into the desert night with a folded card pressed to his heart like the start of a new flight plan. The restaurant was tucked into the edge of a small air park on the outskirts of Phoenix, half patio, half hangar-turned bistro, where old pilots like to eat with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the sky. From the outside, it looked like nothing special. But inside, under string lights and ceiling fans that creaked in rhythm with the evening breeze, it was a place made for quiet beginnings. Noah arrived 5 minutes early. He didn't wear a suit, just a clean collared shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and the same worn boots that had walked miles through his past. His hands were scrubbed, his stubble trimmed, but nothing about him looked polished. He looked exactly like himself, and that somehow felt right. The hostess pointed him toward the back patio where a table had been reserved next to the open view of the small runway. A single candle flickered in a glass jar. Beyond it, the horizon stretched in pale blue, fading to silver, a soft desert dusk waiting to fall. He sat, then waited, but only for a moment. Vivian arrived with the wind. She wore a pale blue dress, not flashy, not corporate, just simple flowing and so profoundly her that Noah's breath caught when he saw her. Her hair was down. No laptop, no tablet, no disguise, just her. "Hi," she said. "Hey," he replied. It was almost laughable how small those words were and how big they felt. She sat across from him. No shield, no preamble. The silence was comfortable. A waitress appeared, took their order, and disappeared just as quickly, sensing what so few people could. This was not a first date, but the quiet reunion of two stories that had diverged too soon. Vivian leaned back in her chair and looked at the sky. "I used to come here with my father," she said. "He loved watching the planes take off. Even after he stopped flying, he'd sit here with a cup of coffee and just watch." Noah followed her gaze. A Cessna taxied slowly across the tarmac, then lifted into the sky like it had somewhere important to be. "He sounds like someone I would have liked," Noah said. "You would have," she replied. "He believed in engines the way you do, not just as machines, but as stories in motion." A beat passed. Then she added more softly, "He also believed in second chances." Noah smiled faintly. "Smart man." She looked back at him. "He would have liked you." The food arrived, and for a few minutes conversation drifted to small things, music, books, the absurdity of pre-packaged airline peanuts. They laughed, not because they had to, but because it felt good to. They shared a bottle of wine, not to celebrate, but to mark the moment. Somewhere during the meal, Vivian grew quiet, not withdrawn, just thoughtful. "I've been offered a promotion," she said finally. Noah set down his fork. "Good for you." She gave a half smile. It would mean moving to D.C., more press, more politics, less of everything else. "Are you going to take it?" She didn't answer right away. "I used to think ambition was the only fuel worth chasing," she said. "But then I met a man who brought an engine back to life, not because anyone asked him to, but because it needed to live." She looked at him, eyes soft. "And I realized I don't want to keep building things just to watch them crash." Noah didn't say anything. He let her sit with her own words the way she'd learned to let silence speak first. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table to him. "What's this A grant?" she said. "Private. Quiet. No strings. Enough to fund a small workshop, or a scholarship, or whatever you want it to be." He opened it, read the short letter inside. His name, the amount, the phrase for restoring more than an engine. He folded it slowly, his fingers lingering on the edge. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." He looked at her not with gratitude, but with the kind of respect that only grows from shared scars. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat in silence for a long moment, the candle flickering between them, the night folding itself around the edge of the sky. Then Vivian said, "You know, there's a small aircraft museum 2 miles from here. They've got a restoration hangar, and they're always short on hands." Noah raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job?" She smirked. "I'm offering you a place to land. Or take off, depending on the day." He chuckled. "That sounds like a dangerous amount of freedom." She tilted her head. "Would you consider it?" Noah looked out at the runway, then back at her. "I'd consider anything he said if it meant hearing you say that again." She blushed. Actually blushed. And it wasn't lost on him that for a woman who commanded boardrooms with fire in her spine, this moment, this vulnerable, real moment, was more powerful than any speech she'd ever given. The stars began to appear above them one by one. Neither of them moved to leave. There were no declarations, no promises, just the steady growing certainty of two people who had learned finally that healing wasn't a return to what was, but the creation of something new, something earned. As a jet roared overhead on final approach somewhere in the distance, Vivian reached across the table and took his hand. No agenda, no plan, just permission to begin. A month had passed since the Thunder Corps whispered its song to the world again. The hangar, once weather-beaten and forgotten, now stood quiet but dignified, its rusted walls, patched windows replaced floor swept clean of dust and memory. It wasn't a museum. It wasn't a workshop either. It was something in between, a place where old things came to breathe again. On one wall hung a framed schematic, Thunder Corps, version 1.0. Next to it, the retraction letter signed in blue ink. Beneath them sat Timothy's nameplate, polished and anchored to a piece of salvaged fuselage. Visitors came from time to time. Engineers, students, pilots who had heard whispers of the engine that never gave up, but mostly it was quiet, peaceful, intentional. Noah stood at the center of it all, wiping his hands with a shop towel. He had a new routine now, part restoration, part mentorship. The nearby museum had welcomed his presence with open arms, offering him a part-time role, helping restore vintage aircraft, mentoring interns, and giving the occasional quiet talk about listening to machines like they had something to say. But today wasn't about engines. Today he was preparing for something else. He reached for the final box tucked in the corner, thin, heavy hand-carved, and placed it carefully on a table near the Thunder Corps. Then he stepped back, arms folded, and waited. Right on time, Vivian arrived. She wore a denim jacket over a summer dress, her hair pulled back loosely, her smile easy. She no longer carried a phone in her hand or a checklist in her head. She looked more than anything like a woman who had remembered how to be. "Is this it?" she asked, approaching the table. Noah nodded. "This is it." Vivian opened the box. Inside, resting on deep blue velvet, was a smaller version of the Thunder Corps, an exact replica crafted from leftover metal, polished, smooth, every detail intact. Beneath it, a plaque read, "For the engine that waited and the people who finally listened." Vivian's eyes welled. She ran her fingers over the replica, then looked up at him. "This is beautiful." "It's yours," he said simply. She blinked. "Why?" "Because I needed to let it go," he replied, "and I needed to give it to someone who helped me remember why it ever mattered." She closed the box gently and stood in silence for a long moment. Then she said, "I turned down the promotion." Noah didn't react immediately. He let her words hang there like a bird catching its first wind. "I thought it would feel like failure," she continued, "but it doesn't. It feels like choosing something instead of proving something." He nodded. "What are you going to do?" "I'm starting a new fund," she said. "Small-scale innovation projects. Things that got lost in bureaucracy or fear. I'm calling it Second Flight." Noah smiled. "You've got a name for everything, don't you? Only the things I want to keep." She stepped closer. "And I'd like to keep seeing you," she said, voice softer now. "If you'd want that." Noah looked at her eyes crinkling at the edges. "I do." It was that simple. No grand kiss, no cinematic music, just two people standing in a space they'd both once abandoned, now choosing not to abandon each other. Outside, the sky shifted from pale blue to golden peach. The wind picked up slightly, teasing the edge of Vivian's jacket. A soft roar echoed from the runway nearby, one of the old planes starting up for a weekend ride. "I still think about Timothy," Noah said. "Sometimes I wonder what he'd say if he were here." Vivian looked out at the sky. "I think he'd say, 'You finished what you started,' and then went further." Noah nodded. "Maybe he'd be proud." "I know he would," she said. "And I think—" He waited too. They stood together watching as the old plane lifted into the air, its wings catching the light just right, casting a long shadow over the sand before soaring out of view. A few children ran by outside the hangar, one of them shouting, "Look, that one's flying." Vivian smiled. "Still magic, isn't it?" Noah looked at her. "It always was. We just forgot." She slipped her hand into his. No hesitation, no agenda. Just warmth. Just now. And maybe that was the most powerful flight of all, not in engines or airspeed, but in people finding their way back to themselves, back to each other. The jet had waited, and so had they. Now finally, everything could fly again. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories and thoughts truly make this community special. And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep sharing these meaningful journeys with more people who need a little light in their day. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care and keep believing in second chances.